Welcome to day 9 of our Network Plus course. It's been an exciting period and we are now wrapping up our course and we're getting towards the end. And I think next week we'll probably be running our last two classes. We'll see how things will basically go. But we're going to be focusing on network troubleshooting. When we look at next week, we're basically now narrowing down everything that we've covered in the last 9 days and now focusing on the practical aspects on how best you are able to troubleshoot. So if there's any class that you don't want to miss, it is the classes next week, because they're going to take everything that we're focused on and now start making sense out of it and being able to then break it down, configure it, test it, fix it when everything else is broken. So you don't want to miss the next two classes. Just a note: if you see me running around, there's a rat somewhere in my room, and in the event that it comes out, you might see me jumping around. So just a disclaimer. But picking up on our lesson and where we left things, let me just give a mic right where we left things in the last class. We were looking at the different attacks that you can encounter on your network. And we spoke about things like MAC spoofing. And today we're going to be looking at app spoofing. We're going to be looking at rogue DHCP and what you can do to probably mitigate from these attacks when they happen on your particular network. So I'm just going to share my screen and just a second. All right, so the first attack that we're going to be looking at is known as app spoofing. And we said on a layer 2 device, you need the MAC address of your gateway in order for you to communicate. You need the MAC address of any PC that you want to talk to from a layer 2's perspective. And remember, when we spoke about app and the app resolution protocol, we said that when the switch does not have the MAC address, it forwards packets to every other port on that particular switch, except the one that it received that particular request from. And it's in that process that the switch then gets to find out about the port where the MAC address is basically located. And the PC with the MAC address then basically responds. So your app cache basically contains your MAC address to IP address resolution so that you're able to then reach devices. So when you have app spoofing on your network, you have someone who's acting as a malicious actor who falsifies the MAC address of a particular device, with the objective that when they represent themselves as the destination, you are going to send your packets to them, assuming that you are talking to the endpoint, and yet you are talking to someone who is a malicious actor in that whole conversation. And thus, they can then capture the packets and be able to manipulate or get access to the data. So it is important for you to then protect your devices on the network using technologies that prevent such attacks from happening. The next attack is rogue DHCP. Now, we spoke about DHCP servers, but we didn't probably cover them in much detail. We just highlighted that a DHCP server contains a pool of IP addresses, and you go to the DHCP server to request an IP address. But we say that the DHCP server not only gives you the IP address, but it also gives you the gateway. And in some instances, it will give you, in some instances, it will give you the DNS. So when a rogue DHCP server comes on the network, all it's trying to do is trying to falsify giving IP addresses to endpoints on a particular network. So they might be thinking that they're talking to the true DHCP server, but in actual fact, they're talking to the malicious DHCP server. And because he's giving the gateway and he's also giving the DNS, he's then able to redirect traffic to exit through the rogue gateway and the rogue DNS server. And in that process, they'll probably be able to implement a man-in-the-middle attack and be able to listen to the entire conversation. So it is important to use different security protocols that help you to mitigate this particular attack on your particular network. So once again, we are looking at the threats or the attacks that you are going to encounter on your network. All right, we're looking at the threats and the attacks that you're going to encounter on your network. The next one is something known as an evil twin. And I'm sure you have been to a shopping mall, you've been to places like McDonald's. And when you get there, there's usually free Wi-Fi, right? So they give you free wireless. And the free Wi-Fi might be called McDonald's, or it might be called KFC, or might be called the name of the shopping center. Now, the assumption is that the Wi-Fi is indeed genuine, authentic McDonald's Wi-Fi, but there's no way to verify. So what the evil twin type of attack basically does is that it simulates genuine SSIDs on a wireless space, and you connect your laptop thinking that you're connecting to the McDonald's Wi-Fi, when in actual fact, you're connecting to a malicious actor's Wi-Fi that is called McDonald's. And in the process, they are then able to then eavesdrop on your conversation, which is why they always say that if you're going to be using public Wi-Fi, never log into banking accounts or accounts that are confidential, because there's a very high possibility that someone might be listening to that particular traffic. In the event that you need to connect to free Wi-Fi, then when you connect to free Wi-Fi, make sure that you connect to VPN, because the VPN tunnel is going to encrypt your traffic and is going to protect it as it traverses through the untrusted network. Later on in this class, in this video, we're going to be looking at VPNs and how VPNs function, and being able to then demonstrate how you can use VPNs to be able to then protect yourself. So evil twins are very, 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 very common. There are so many tools that you can buy. There's a device known as a pineapple something, that allows you to be able to replicate SSIDs and reroute traffic coming through you so that you can then be able to observe. So if you're curious enough and you want to check online, find it online, and then you can be able to practice, but just be sure that whoever is connecting to your network is someone that you've notified. Otherwise, you don't want to do anything illegal. And then now that takes us to ransomware. Now, ransomware, we've heard about this so many times. Ransomware, basically, a malicious actor encrypts your data, and then they ask for a ransom or for a sum of money to be paid in order for them to unlock your files. Some people have paid before and they get their files unlocked, but it's kind of difficult to trust someone who's holding you at ransom to try and give you back your files, to be able to trust them that they are being genuine and they won't be able to renegade on their word. But that is how ransomware works. And the next set of attacks is password attacks. And there are two types of password attacks. There is something known as brute force, and there's something known as a dictionary attack. So with brute force, someone is basically trying as many passwords as they can, trying to brute force into your credentials and hopefully be able to what? To authenticate. With a dictionary attack, they are basically trying to pick common words that are found in the dictionary, because human beings are creatures of habit. We always revert to the things that we know the best. So most of the passwords are always going to be centered on things that we know. I'm wearing a Cisco shirt. I don't know how many times I've seen passwords that are Cisco 123 in production environments. Why? Because people are just lazy to be able to create passwords that are more difficult, passwords that have multiple characters. So there's always that recommendation that don't pick words that are in the dictionary because you are susceptible to a dictionary attack. So your password should contain, alphanumeric numbers, capital letters, small letters. You're actually much better having a password that is a phrase, like my favorite YouTube channel is XYZ. That's a password that is more difficult to crack than, my name, capital letter, or the famous one is replacing certain characters with numbers. So if I've got an O in my name, I put a zero instead of an O. All those things will make you susceptible to password attacks when malicious people try to penetrate your network. The next attack is malware, and malware is basically a grouping of malicious programs that are trying to cause harm in your network. So you might have a program that gets installed, and when it installs, it then tries to find other things or tries to siphon data. It's all grouped up as malware, and you have devices such as intrusion prevention devices that are there to be able to then help protect your network from these particular threats. And we're basically going to be closing off with something known as phishing. I'm sure phishing, many of us have encountered it at some point. This is when you get an email that is trying to lure you into make you think that it is a genuine email and make you click a particular link. And most of the times when you click the link then downloads, or they try to impersonate to say, oh, by the way, I'm your manager, I'm the MD, I got stuck in a different country, I can't use my credit card, please send me money, and all the things that come along the lines, and then you basically fall for it. So phishing falls under that method of attacks that are used in the IT world to try and be able to then gain access. And the last one is something known as tailgating. And tailgating basically means trying to gain access to locations that you're not permitted to have access by following someone who's got access to a particular building. So you act as if either you work in that building and you ask someone who's about to get into an elevator to hold it for you. And by so doing, you are gaining access to a building that you're not meant to gain access. So why are we talking about this? Why are we covering this? The whole objective is that we can't defend and protect against things that we don't know. So it is important for us to have an understanding, on a day-to-day basis, if you drive a car, depending on which country you're at, but 90% of the countries, around the world, if you drive a car and you drive in areas that are not safe, you're going to close your windows. Why? Because those areas are known not to be safe. So you're going to close your windows. In some instances, you're going to lock your door. Knowing about the threats, knowing about the attacks, then helps us to be able to then protect our networks. It helps us to be conscious of the threats that we're basically going to encounter on our networks. So I'm going to erase that, and then so now we have concluded, the threats side. We are now looking at remote access. VPNs have not been as popular as they have been in the last year or two. Prior to COVID, working from home was a very good concept, but was one that was not fully deployed. But when COVID came, people were forced to work from home because they could not work from the offices. But at the same time, they needed access to office resources. And what was the tool that allowed them that particular access? It was VPNs. For those who are not aware, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. It's a very common term that I would expect every one of us to at least understand what a VPN is and what it basically does. So what is a VPN? A VPN is just basically creating your own virtual private tunnel over an untrusted network. Now, the challenge with giving people connectivity to office resources from home, if we did not have VPNs, it would mean having leased lines going to people's houses just so that they can have connectivity into the office. But the VPN allows people to connect over an untrusted network, which is the internet in general, and be able to tunnel that data between the end user and the infrastructure sitting at the head office of a workplace. Now, there are two types of VPNs that you encounter when you work in the industry. There is what is known as a site-to-site VPN. And a site-to-site VPN is basically a VPN between two sites or multiple sites over the internet. So you got Office A and you got Office B. And in between, you create a tunnel. Let me just change the color. You create a tunnel over the internet, and that tunnel is going to carry your data and protect it. The internet is a very untrusted network. There are people who are looking to cause harm over the internet. There are people who want to hijack your traffic. And if your traffic is not protected, they will then be able to eavesdrop. So to prevent that from happening, you then encrypt your traffic into what is known as a tunnel. And we're going to discuss the tunnel, how you configure it, what is involved in the creation of that tunnel. The second type of VPN is probably the common one that most of us basically used when we're connecting to office resources during COVID. It is known as a client VPN. And this one is a device trying to access resources that are sitting at an office that is in the CBD. So this is an office and you're connecting using your PC. And some of the tools that you use to connect are things like AnyConnect, which is the Cisco VPN, remote access VPN client that allows you to then connect to the VPN controlled by Cisco devices. So you got site to site, which is connecting different sites, and then you got client VPN. And by very nature, they operate in a different manner. Now, within that VPN space, there's something known as split tunneling or a full tunnel. Now, the difference between split tunneling and a full tunnel, and I'll just change my color. So this is the internet, or maybe let me put this being the internet. With split tunnel, only the traffic that is destined for the head office goes over the VPN tunnel. I don't know what's happening with my pen. Okay, there we go. So only the traffic that's going towards the head office is routed through the tunnel. The traffic that's not going towards the head office, that's going towards the internet, is split and it exits from your home network. And why this is important is because you don't want to forward traffic to your head office that has nothing to do with the head office, because then the internet link between the head office and the internet must be wide enough to cater for everyone who's trying to push the traffic going through the head office. On the other end, a full tunnel, which is a tunnel end to end, basically pipes everything from the source going to the destination, and all that goes in one single tunnel. So when you're talking about split tunnel and full tunnel VPN, this is what we're basically referring to. One of the two basically redirects traffic that's not interesting traffic from being sent down the pipe that's going to the head office, and only interesting traffic is the one that gets sent to the pipe that is going to the head office. And with our VPNs, we have what is known as a phase 1 tunnel and a phase 2 tunnel. And I was trying to find a way that I could probably simplify and give an example on what is this phase 1 tunnel, what is this phase 2 tunnel, and I'm sure many of you are wondering, what is this picture doing? Why a picture of a boy who's trying to propose, and how is that relevant to VPNs? And I'm going to break it down because this is one of the few concepts that I struggled with. Because there are a lot of steps that are basically involved. So I trust that the examples that we're going to look at will be able to then help us understand the concept more. Now, if you look at my screen, I've got something on this corner. Might be looking pretty small on your end, but I want us to picture us going for a job. Applying for a job. Yes, not going for a job, applying for a job. So what is the process of applying for a job? The company is going to create an advert. In the advert, the company is going to state that we are looking for these qualifications. Either you must have a degree, or you must have a certification, or you must have a diploma, right? This is the criteria that the organization is using to choose who it wants to work for them. The company will then state the years of experience that you must have in order for you to work, or in order for you to qualify for this particular position. And then in some instances, depending on the infrastructure that they use in the organization, they will ask someone to have some vendor experience, right? It could be VMware, it could be Cisco, it could be Microsoft, it could be AWS. Because they deal with this particular vendor on a regular basis, they want a candidate who has that particular skill set. And then the last most common request is a driver's license if you're going to be working a job that requires for you to travel. Now, these are the 4 criteria that the organization is going to put in an advert when they are advertising for a job. Now, when you make an application and you look at that particular requirement list, you're going to ask yourself, do I have a degree? Tick. Do I have 2 years experience? Tick. Do I have the required vendors that they're asking for? Tick. And do I have a driver's license? Tick. It is when my qualifications and the advert come together and they match, that when I make an application, I then get called for an interview. So what I just explained is what happens in phase 1 of a VPN tunnel. So in phase 1, the 2 devices that want to talk over VPN go through what is known as a negotiation. And the negotiation process is the router on one end and the VPN device on another end go through what they call IKE proposals. So one device sends its proposal, and the one that sends is known as the initiator. And it states what it requires from the other device in order for them to form a tunnel. So it is going to say, in terms of hashing, I either accept MD5 or I accept SHA as a hashing algorithm. In terms of encryption, I use either triple DES or AES. In terms of authentication, I'm using a pre-shared key. And these values have to match in order for phase 1 tunnel to establish. If these values don't match, then the phase 1 tunnel is not going to be established. Why? Because the proposals do not match. Now, if we were to take this example in a context of a relationship, it is the same thing. When I got to know my wife before she was my wife, I had to discuss the things that I wanted in the future, and she had to discuss the things that she wanted in the future. And when the two aligned, then phase one of the relationship was established. But two tunnels have to be formed. So phase one is basically the control plane. This is the plane that basically carries all your management traffic, all the traffic that is keeping the VPN tunnel alive. So you keep alive and all these things flow under the phase one tunnel. The phase one tunnel basically handles your key exchange. And then the phase two tunnel is the one that comes after. So in our example, I've made an application. I meet the criteria that is stated in the advert. So what happens? When they look at my application, because I meet the criteria, they then call me for what? For an interview. Now we are going into phase two of the tunnel. And in phase two of the tunnel, there are also things like encryption that get looked into, the lifetime of the tunnel, any hashing, things like perfect forward secrecy, where keys are alternated in order to secure your tunnel. So when you're dealing with VPNs, there are two types of tunnel. There's a phase one tunnel, there's a phase two tunnel. In the phase one tunnel, it is the two devices negotiating what protocols they're going to use in order for them to establish a control plane. And then after they establish that control plane, then you move to the phase two tunnel, which is also known as the IPsec tunnel. This is the tunnel where the actual data is going to flow. And in that phase two, something similar is also discussed in terms of how are you going to encrypt the data. And when the tunnels are formed, that then creates a virtual private network. So we're using a public network to tunnel our traffic through the internet, but then the traffic is protected, it is encrypted, and people who eavesdrop in that conversation will not be able to see anything. Next week, when you go through troubleshooting, we're going to go through a lab that looks at this encrypted traffic before we encrypt, during encryption, and after encryption, and you can be able to see a packet capture that then shows you what someone would see if they were to intercept your traffic. So the objective is us trying to carry traffic over an untrusted network and making sure that it makes it to the particular destination. On the same theme and topic as VPNs, we are looking at remote access. Beyond VPNs, what other remote access tools do we have? We have remote desktop protocol. For those that have used Windows, this is a very familiar concept. Remote desktop protocol is a protocol that allows us to remotely connect to Microsoft infrastructure over the network. It uses UDP port 3389. So this needs to be added onto the list of ports that you need to learn. So it uses UDP port 3389. And you can share your desktop both internal to your organization, or someone can be able to remotely connect. When you remotely connect, you're connecting into what is known as a remote desktop connection. This is when the user is accessing the remote server remotely. Now, this was a Microsoft concept, and VNC then brought it into Linux and Mac operating systems. So VNC is equivalent to what RDP does, or what RDP does, but in a Linux and a Mac environment. The whole objective is to try and give you remote access into your servers. So when we manage servers, we remotely connect to them. I might be sitting at home and we're sitting in the office, but I remotely connect onto the server so that I can then make the necessary configurations. Right, if you're joining us, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate, let me know. I'll take my time to stop, be able to explain. But if you don't have any questions, then we can then basically go through. The next one is SSH, which is secure shell. That's correct. And SSH, we use it on majority on network devices. This is when you can remotely connect to a router or to a switch, and you use the SSH protocol to be able to do that. So SSH then allows you to connect via your PC and then get to these devices via SSH. The alternative back in the day was something known as Telnet. It still works, but it's not recommended. The reason being that Telnet is not secure. Information with Telnet is sent in clear text. So if someone was to eavesdrop the conversation, they can see your passwords going through the network. And once again, in next week's class, we are going to see how someone can see traffic that is flowing over Telnet. And you can actually be able to see the password that is flowing through, just to demonstrate to you that if you use Telnet, it's not encrypted. SSH is the encrypted version of Telnet that basically protects your network. And we're going to close off by looking at out-of-band management. And out-of-band management is how do you connect to your devices not using the same network that they use for traversing traffic. Now, I've got some switches. So this is our switch, this is our router, and this is my PC. This is the path that the data in the organization takes when it's going to the switch. This is the path that it goes when it's going to the router. Now, in the event of an outage on the network, this is going to go down. This is going to go down. But you, as a network engineer, you still need to manage this device. You still need to log into it to try and work out why is it down? What is the issue? Now, if you use these two are called in-band. Let's see if I can get the blue pen. Okay. So these two are called in-band communication paths. Why? Because they are working in the same path as your normal data. And if this was to go down, then you have no connectivity. So in the network world, we have what we call out of band. And out of band is a connection to your network devices that does not traverse through the same path as data. So if these links were to go down, I can then go via the out of band link and SSH into this router and be able to verify what is happening. So it could be a separate VLAN. And in some instances, depending on the size of the organization, you can actually have a full solution that is an out of band solution where you got modems that you can connect to over the internet, and then those modems then connect straight into your network equipment. So it doesn't matter if your entire network was to go down, you'll still be able to access your devices from a remote perspective. And I don't know how many times I can tell you how that has been a lifesaver, because when there's an outage, one of the most difficult things to do is trying to reach the device to investigate. And if you don't have an out-of-band solution, then you're going to get stuck. So that is in band and out of band. Now, how do you detect the threats on your network? How do you secure your network? Remember, we mentioned that security is multi-layered. You have to defend in depth. It must be an onion. Actually, onion is a standard. When you look at security, they go through an onion simulated standard. And in order for you to protect your network, you must be able to detect some of these threats before they happen. Many organizations have cameras. Where I work, there are cameras everywhere. They're always watching because they offer you a first line of defense. In my previous job, I worked at a stadium, and there were cameras everywhere because the threat can come in any direction. So I'm not saying buy cameras for your organization, but cameras, depending on the magnitude of the business, can offer you your first line of defense. Motion detection gives you another layer of defense where you can be able to put motion sensors in particular areas, and when intruders go into those particular areas, then you get notified. So when someone opens the door to the data center, it can send an alert to say the door of the data center has been opened, and someone can then be able to verify that the person who's getting access to the data center indeed does have does have the access to the data center. You've got things like asset tags, and where I currently work, we have security tags where you have to put them on, and they contain information but also provide identification. So if you are found in a location that is not one that you need to find anyone at any given time, that asset tag or badge is going to then help you get identified and for you to then get the clearance to be in that particular area. Then you got things like temper detection, like when someone opens the door of a rack, or things that you want to protect, you can then be able to use technologies such as temper detection to be able to then protect that particular asset. And so we have detected what are the other prevention methods that we can be able to use to defend our networks. At the heart of most network threats is the human being. The human being is usually the weakest link in any network defense. So if you don't educate users on the network, then you are basically increasing the threat. And when I'm talking about educating of employees or employee training, you're talking about sanity of passwords, the length of passwords, people not to write passwords on pieces of paper and sticking them on their laptop screens so that they can be able to remember. Encouraging people to identify when emails that are suspicious are sent to them. What are the key indicators of phishing emails? Is it the spelling mistakes? Is it the grammar that is in that email? Or in other instances, if it's just coming from someone that you don't usually get an email from, then you should treat that email with suspicion. Remember, we spoke about the concept of zero trust network. And users need to take that approach that you should not trust any email without analyzing what is contained, how to see hyperlinks, how to verify that the email behind the user address might not, just because the email is saying that it's coming from facebook.com, does not necessarily mean that it's coming from Facebook, because then when you then go on the hyperlink, you then realize that you're being redirected somewhere to something else. So that's part of the awareness that you need to know when you are dealing with employee training. You need to have access control. Your rooms should not be ones that someone can just open the door and go through. You need to have access cards that people can tap in to get into buildings. And when someone leaves the organization, that card is withdrawn and taken away so that they then don't have future access to your buildings. You can have things like badge readers, like I mentioned, earlier on, to say some people have cards and those cards have got faces. If you work for places like the Pentagon or high profile government buildings, you're always going to be required to have some form of identity that identifies you based on the role in question and the clearance of where you are allowed to be in the building. You've got things like biometrics, and biometrics is basically looking at something that you are. It could be your eyes, it could be your finger. At one of the organizations that I worked with had biometrics, fingerprint. So I would scan the card, put the fingerprint, and then the tool would then open the door. If the fingerprint was not read properly because I bite my fingers. Sometimes I used to have issues with, getting my fingerprint read. And if the fingerprint is not read, you can't get access to the room. So having multiple forms of verification to provide access would then help in protecting your network. Thanks, Garkai, for the kind words. And yes, I hope you're getting value. And once again, we continue with our class. So we've looked at biometrics. You need to lock your racks. Some of these things seem like basic information, but most of the times they are not implemented in real life environments. People, yes, racks will come with keys, but for some people, they might consider the unlocking and locking of racks as something that is a headache, and then they leave racks unlocked. So when someone then gains access into the server room, then they've got full access to the racks. But if the racks are equally locked, then you're increasing the layers in which someone has to go through in order for them to gain access to your network. You need to lock your cabinets, and you can have things, such as smart lockers. So you need to make sure that you are protecting your networks at each and every stage and having multiple layers of defense when you're basically dealing with networks. So that basically, in a nutshell, just narrows down to the things that we need. Security is a broad subject. And there are so many areas that we need to be able to defend on. We can't 100% protect our networks, but there are steps that we can take to be able to protect them. And some of the steps might be things that might seem menial, just educating people that when you're walking into the office, or certain parts of the building where access is restricted, try and always identify someone who is in the building. If someone says, hold the door for me, try and make sure that you know that this person belongs to the organization. I know at some point we had our boss hired, there are organizations that do not penetration testing, but they come and test your user awareness on cybersecurity issues. So they send someone to come in the organization who acts like an employee, and that person goes to the reception and say, oh, by the way, I'm here, I'm looking for, so-and-so. And in some situations, they are sent to the particular office in question where they can sit unattended. And I remember the guy that got sent to come to organization went to one of the departments and he said, oh, by the way, I've been sent by John. He said, I need to look at 1, 2, 3, 4. And guess what the user did? They gave them access to their PC and they were able to gain full access to someone's computer just because they had basically given them false information. And this information is not difficult to find because it just takes me searching your organization. And that now we're talking about social engineering. It takes me searching your organization on LinkedIn, trying to find out who works there and finding out what do they do, what department do they work. And then I might send you an email and I might get a response to say, oh, by the way, I'm on holiday. I'm on leave from this date to this date. So I now know, okay, John is on leave from this date to this date. So when I go to the organization, I can then say, I've been sent by John. And no one is going to dispute because he's on leave, they can't verify, and so that awareness is very, 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 very important. I've seen organizations where they send white hat phishing emails just to see who's going to click. And then when you click, they will tell you, by the way, make sure that you be aware of cybersecurity, be cybersecurity aware, because not every email is trusted. And some of these emails will have indicators that if you really looked at them, you would be able to realize that, no, something is amiss with this email. They are the obvious emails where someone is saying, oh, my father is a prince, oh, sorry, my father was a king and he left me a fortune and I want to transfer money to your bank account, but for me to, withdraw the money, I need you to send me $1,000 so that I can then clear the money. I'm like, okay, if you have $1 million, why not separate $1,000 and then pay for whatever you want to pay for and then withdraw the other $1 million? I mean, why do you need my $1,000? So there are some emails that are pretty obvious, but some of the emails are pretty subtle and they hide a lot and they make themselves seem like they are genuine emails. So that's basically the wrap up of today. It's a very short lesson, pretty brief. We have looked at the last topics that we needed to cover on the security side. Next week, we're going to be focusing on the practical side. We're going to be looking at troubleshooting steps. How do you troubleshoot your network? Where do you look for faults? What commands do you type? If you're dealing with a layer 3 problem, how do you troubleshoot a layer 3 problem? If you're dealing with a layer 2 problem, how do you troubleshoot a layer 2 problem? And then any other question that you might have. So this is my opportunity to say, if you got any questions that you want me to cover next week in relation to any topic in regards to Network Plus that you might want me to explain, please send me an email. My email address is in the description below. Or if you're online, you can send your question if you do have your question right now. The last session was pretty good. We had so many questions and we're able to go back and forth. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. If I don't know the answer, I'll go find it for you and I'll come back to you and I'll let you know. So if there are no questions, probably going to give you the next minute, one of our shortest classes. And next week is going to be a more practically driven week where the focus is on troubleshooting and practical questions. I'm actually contemplating to do maybe just a practical lesson, just focusing on all the concepts that we went through, but now going through them practically, configuring and making sure that everything else is working. And once again, if there are no questions, thank you very much for taking your time and I will see you in the next one.